Our next speaker is Dr. Liesl Folks. She'll be giving the keynote titled Training for Managers and Leaders Dealing with Gender Issues in the Workplace.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. And I hope I can, yes, I can. Oh, there we go. Thank you, whoever's magically making the slides work. I did change the title a little bit, and so you'll see that I've narrowed in on the issues of harassment in particular. And I want to just give some definitions so that we're really clear about what I am talking about. And in particular, this is hilarious. I can't actually read my own slides, so forgive me. I'm taking a definition now here of gender-based harassment that was produced in a study from the National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine that was actually just published a few weeks ago in January 2025, as all forms of sex-based and sexual harassment, including quid pro quo, unwanted sexual attention, bullying, harassment, and assault. So it's a pretty comprehensive list of issues that can happen in the workplace. I'm just going to keep saying harassment. It's a big bundle of things. It's not a small group of issues. But I want to also just note that harassment is still strikingly present in STEM workplaces. Reports show that in the US, for example, some 54% of women report that they've been seriously harassed at some point in their careers, and it is a major cause of women leaving science, technology, engineering, and math fields. So it's a pretty significant, pretty prevalent problem. And today I want to talk particularly about how individual leaders can be more responsive to these issues, because how a leader deals with an issue of harassment when it's elevated to their attention really matters. And I will point out that institutional responses for dealing with harassment are often very complicated, very legalistic, and very slow, very painfully slow. But the good news is individual leaders can mitigate a lot of that pain if they're thoughtful about what they're doing. So, I want to acknowledge that the roles for leaders in these situations are very difficult. And let me frame up first what do I mean by leaders. Many of you are leaders in your own right, in your own work settings, either because you have a formal title or because you run a research group and you have students that you are responsible for looking after, and postdocs and so on, staff as well. And when we think about what leaders have to deal with, we have to acknowledge that they are dealing with complex issues, but they're also dealing with what can often be very emotionally charged situations. So they can be a lot of complexity about who said what, who did what. There's often very thin evidence, and you're relying on people's narratives about what has happened in a particular situation where conflict has arisen. And these poor leaders are left with trying to figure out who's telling the truth, what really happened, and how should we deal with it as an institution? How do we deal with it fairly, equitably, and without furthering harm? There are also other issues that people talk about a lot, I have to say. Funding and reputations can be put at risk, and work products can be delayed. So commitments to deliver particular things can be delayed, and careers can be put at risk because of harassment issues. So my strong thinking here is that leaders need more and different training to help them do better in dealing with harassment issues when they get surfaced, when they're raised to those leaders. So why does it matter for this conference? Well, harassment impacts representation of women in STEM in three completely different ways, and they really are quite different things. One is women get driven out of STEM roles because of the stress of the harassment, because of the direct effect of being harassed in the workplace. Many, many women will report that they actually were being harassed at work, and their solution to that was to leave. right? They didn't see another path forward, so they just left. And they go and do other things. They're perfectly clever people, and they go off and do other things with their lives. Then there's the fallout from reporting harassment. So some people report harassment, and then the negative commentary that attaches to them and the negative effects from that harassment and real retaliation can cause them then to leave the discipline that they were in. And thirdly, individuals who are in working environments where they can see harassment occurring may leave that environment because they're avoiding being subject to harassment. So they see that there's some danger around them and they avoid it by leaving. So there are these three different mechanisms by which women are being pushed out of STEM because of harassment happening in the STEM workplace. Each of these slows down career progression notably. There was a lovely story in Nature about representation of women in STEM in India specifically, so I just pulled these data. And the headline on this story was that fully one-third, I think? Yeah, 1/3 of STEM conferences in India have no women speakers, none. Which is kind of alarming, right? That's pretty scary. And there's no reason to think that these experiences of women are very different in different countries. We think that women everywhere experience these sorts of harassment issues. So I want to talk for a minute about what I refer to as the B-path problem, which is that if men and women enter their careers at the bottom of whatever institutional hierarchy everybody comes in at, men are much more likely to move smoothly from level to level in their hierarchical organizations than women are. Because of harassment, women are very likely to have a much slower path to leadership roles, and we talked earlier with Agendra's presentation about the representation of women in leadership roles, in C-suite roles. Their ability to get to those C-suite roles is being slowed down by having to deal with harassment issues along the way. And that makes the B path a very much less desirable career trajectory than the A path options that men much more frequently experience. Let me be clear that men and women report that they experience harassment in the workplace, certainly in the US, but I think this is a pretty universal finding. It's just that it's much more likely that women will experience harassment than men, by about a 90-10 split in the US. I'm just going to put out a sidebar promotion here. If you haven't watched the 30-minute film, Picture a Scientist, which was produced by Nova, please do. Don't do it before you're about to go to bed because it gives me nightmares. But it is an exceptionally short, sharp, and very poignant narrative around how harassment in the workplace can harm women's careers. It's beautifully made, really well done. And it's 30 minutes. It's a really short watch, but worth watching if you haven't already seen it. So now we're getting to what can you do as leaders, and I know there are many, many, many both actual leaders in the room, but also aspiring leaders in STEM disciplines here in the room. What I'd ask you to do is think about how do I efficiently and fairly manage this situation while also protecting the career aspirations and progression of the person who has likely been harassed here in whatever situation lands on your desk. I will tell you, so I've served as a provost and as a dean in institutions of higher ed. I will tell you that when leaders are new in their roles, they are typically shocked by these cases when they come across their desks. They're startled to find how much of this is going on in their own institutions. And the reason for that is, by and largely, we keep these cases rather quiet. We try to do that for all sorts of complicated reasons. Many of them are to protect the careers of the people that have been harmed, but in doing so, we also cover up and protect a lot of bad behavior by people that are the perpetrators of the harassment, somewhat unintentionally, but it does happen. So If you're not a leader today, please still pay attention, because I guarantee you that when you become a leader, this will come across your desk. These issues are much more prevalent than most people understand. So, I want to give you a real-world example, and then I'm going to give you something for you to work on and think about as well. This is a real-world example. This is a student who came to me and made a formal complaint about being very severely harassed by a PhD advisor. These allegations were hair-raising, and I'm not going to go into whatever the allegations were. But this came to me when I was a dean. There were all sorts of very time-consuming processes that would have to be waded through in order to resolve this issue. But in the meantime, I was looking at a senior PhD student who was risking having her PhD progression harmed by having to report that she was now in serious conflict with her advisor. So I was having to think about, here's this issue, here are our processes, here's what is going to happen next. But I also wanted to make sure that she was able to complete her PhD studies without further harm. And she was already distressed about what had already happened. So I then asked a trusted senior colleague to help with the situation by facilitating all discussions, all interactions between the student and the advisor. I was able to do that from my position of leadership. I was able to direct everybody involved to say there will be no communication unless this third person is involved. No email, no phone calls, no face-to-face meetings. Nothing can happen unless that third party is present. And by doing that, I was putting a box around the situation and saying, from now on, there will only be 100% professional interactions between these parties. I established that that was going to happen in a face-to-face discussion with everybody, but also by email, so there was a written record of what was the requirement was, because you want to always make sure people understand that we're serious here. And I was able to do that without saying anything more about the allegations other than that there was clearly interpersonal conflict that had been reported. And to manage that interpersonal conflict, this was what we were going to do going forward. So then, in doing this and separating the conflicted parties, we had to work hard to make sure that the student could still get her work done. So she could still get to the laboratory, but if she was going to be in the laboratory, her advisor was not going to be present, right? And so that was complicated, right? We also had to mandate that letters of recommendation that she needed in order to go out and get a job were going to be reviewed by the mediator, by the facilitator, right, by this third trusted party. And there was a directive to the advisor to say, you will not disparage this student, not under any circumstances. Right? So we really tied the advisor's hands and said, from now on, your behavior will be 100% professional in dealing with this student. Now, notice that I've still made no allegations about what happened, who said what was, whether anything was true or not. All I was doing was saying, from now on, we know there's an issue, and this is how we're going to manage it forward. So then it was on me to make sure that the investigative process was swift, and I will tell you in this case it was not. The student actually graduated before we finished with the investigative process, but I viewed that as a win in this case. But the reason this was so slow is that we had to involve a legal team, but we also had a union involvement. So that slowed everything down because it was complicated. But in the end, the faculty member was ultimately removed from the university. It was that serious. And that kind of isn't the point here. The point is that the student was able to go on with their career without being slowed down and pushed onto the B path because of this incident. So that's why I use this as an example. All right, I think I've got 1 minute. I'm going to stretch it here. Whoever's keeping time, I'm going to really be pushing it, but I promise you I won't be too long. Now I want you to think, actually, you know what we can do? We can roll this straight into questions. This is perfect. Now I want you to think about your role as a leader, and I'm giving you another case study to think about. So Jacinta is a third-year undergraduate student in chemistry, and she's finished a great summer internship working with you, people in the audience. This is you, or you're all thinking, yeah, this is your student now. And she was very excited by her work with you. So when she went back to her home institution, she found a professor, Professor Smith, at her campus, who was doing work that was completely lined up with what she wanted to do for her graduate studies. But in talking to the students who were in that group, she learned that the graduate students in Professor Smith's group were making a bit of a habit of harassing undergraduate women students. So here she is thinking she's going to ask to go and have a research experience with Dr. Smith, but she's hearing this news about these graduate students aren't behaving very well. So she turns to you and tells you that she's thinking instead about working with a different professor, somebody who's not nearly as successful or nearly as closely tied to the work that she says she wants to do for her graduate studies. So the question for you is, what would you recommend that she do? Does anybody have fun? Yes, I love it. Already we've got an answer. Do we have a microphone? Pretend this is now question time. Can we have a microphone for the woman in the blue and white?
In my opinion, she should go for the other professor, not the professor who has these issues of...
This issue. Tell me why.
Oh, well, because, if many people are talking about the professor, that is true. That is not a hype.
Right.
So she should listen to the people advice.
Yeah. I think your answer is the most common answer, which is avoid the problem.
Yeah, that's my personal experience too.
Because you would be putting yourself at risk.
Yeah.
You're making yourself vulnerable if you know that there's a dangerous situation.
Yes.
And that is alarming and scary,
Yeah.
and you don't want to do it. I get it.
Well, that's very personal to me. I have...
I hear you. I hear you.
So, yeah.
I understand completely, let me assure you. And probably 50% of the people in the room understand exactly. Does anyone have a different perspective? Over here.
First of all, we need to investigate that, whether whatever the blame or, what is happening, misinformation. First, has to clarify it, how much extent it is truth or not.
Right, but remember, you're not in the same organization, right? You're the advisor, but you are working at a company, and you are not in that organization. So it's really hard for you to figure out, it's hard for you to help the student figure that out, right?
We need to, if he is the best person, and in that particular area, he's not successful, just like that.
Uh-huh.
If he's having some ethical issues or some problem, he'll not be successful in the top position.
Right.
So he'll be pulled down at any point of time in his career.
Yeah.
So if he is standing such a position for such a long period, this could be something, some people could be raising some misinformation about him.
I agree completely. Okay, so you raise a really good point. We don't really know what's going on here. What we've got is a lot of hearsay. Okay? So here's what is really going on. Jacinta's dilemma is, how does she keep herself safe and stay on the A path, like not get pushed onto the B path, right? So we've asked, what are you going to do? So this is what really happened. Jacinta ended up coming to talk to me. I was the leader involved here. And she was sort of pushed into it by her mentor, this external person. Her mentor said, go and talk about what you want to do with the dean, right? And so she told me. Now, the mentor had already given me a heads up that this was happening, right? But she told me what she'd heard. So what we arranged was that she would go and stay on the A path. She would go and try and work with Dr. Smith. But we had a deal that if anything happened, I would reach in and help her find a new position quickly, right? So I had her back, and that really mattered because she knew that she was putting herself at risk, potentially. We don't know the truth, right? Now, what really the thing that weirded me out was that I'm thinking, Dr. Smith would never condone this stuff, because I knew the guy, right? I'm like, this is really weird. So What was really going on was this bad behavior was happening. The faculty member, the advisor, didn't know it was happening, so we were actually able to fix a whole slew of problems. But what was important for Jacinta was that I had her back, and if things went wrong, I was going to reach in and fix the problem with her, right? You as leaders have that power. You as advisors have that power to say to someone, look, do not give up on your dreams. Persist. But if things go pear-shaped, if things go bad, I'm going to be there. And you're going to come straight back to me and let me know what's going on. So that's the important thing. So as you can see, I'm being pulled off here. But let me just go to this final slide, because this is what I want you to take away. When you're dealing with these issues, you want to be efficient, you want to be fast, and you want to be fair, but do think about your strategy for how do I stop this person's career from being derailed by this issue, because that is one of the core things that is keeping women out of STEM disciplines and out of leadership roles in particular. Thank you very much.